Alrighty, we are recording. This is take 2, and the game audio is audible. Hi there, YouTube, and welcome back to another discussion video. This is the latest in the series of discussion videos leading up to Scarlet and Violet. And we have a special discussion today because it's actually not about Scarlet and Violet. While there is definitely still a lot of Scarlet and Violet news coming out, we've kind of reached the point where I'm going to back away a little bit from a lot of the direct and more detailed reveals, because I want to be careful not to spoil myself too much, because I'm someone who really values the initial experience for Pokemon games and that sense of discovery. I may actually do a video about some of my formative experiences with why I feel that way, but that might be, next week or after that. Today, however, we're talking about a different set of releases that are upcoming, and that is the Virtual Console releases of Pokemon Stadium 1 and Pokemon Stadium 2. Now, right off the bat, I do want to get one thing off the way, and that is that I think that these releases are going to be, visually at least, very good ways to play these games. Pokemon Stadium and Stadium 2 are N64 games, which means that they suffer a particular set of challenges when it comes to playing them on modern displays. Because of their low resolution of 240p, outputting those to modern displays automatically requires things like deinterlacers, fancy upscalers. They output composite video by default, which isn't super great, and all that kind of stuff. So, right off the bat, there's a lot of challenges. But also, because they are early 3D graphics type of games, it also means that there are additional challenges on top of that. Because you basically have to kind of choose between this overly smooth look and a very pixelated look. For instance, things actually don't look too bad right here on the screen. Right now, for the record, I am outputting composite video, that's the yellow, red, and white wires, to the RetroTink 5X, which is upscaling that 240p signal up to 1080p. And then it is also adding a smoothing filter on top of that. Now, while it looks pretty decent via OBS, it's a different story on the actual TV behind me, because if you're upscaling this low resolution 3D graphics to a 4K or even a higher quality 1080p screen, you kind of have to choose between this very smoothed over kind of blurry look and the sharp pixels. You can get better video quality out of an N64 through things like HDMI mods or RGB mods or even just S-video cables, which I do actually have some of. But the problem there that you run into is that once you get clearer and sharper images, things have a tendency to look very pixelated, and it's not always a good fit for these older 3D games. Some people like it more than others. That's definitely more of a taste thing, but it does go to show that there's a lot of considerations that come into... What am I trying to say here? There are a lot of considerations when it comes to deciding how to display these early generation 3D graphics. And one of the best ways to display them is actually through increasing the internal resolution of the games via emulation. That's one of the really cool things about emulation, is that you can do things that original hardware can't. And increasing the internal render resolution is really great for clarity and sharpness and just a ton of things for displaying these older games, and that's a big part of why I think that these virtual consoles will actually be pretty good. Not perfect, mind you, probably. I have heard that the N64 Virtual Console has gotten better since the initial release of it, But also a lot of the issues that plagued games like Ocarina of Time, with their issues with fog effects, might not be as big of an issue here because most of the actual 3D graphics in this game tend to be in much more closed off arenas where the sort of mysteries to serve that sense of scale just really aren't an issue anymore. So rather than having to like hide a bunch of things behind fog effects, you really just focus in on the individual Pokemon and their attacks. It's possible that some of the effects animation might not be wholly accurate, but overall, I think that's a pretty good trade-off for having more clear character models and visuals overall. And after all, that is debatably the most important thing when it comes to these games is, the getting to see all these incredible animations. Just look at the flexibility on Rapidash's snout. Look at the stance it takes when it fires off a flamethrower. Like, these animations are really good, really varied, and really interesting, and it's the main selling point of playing these games. And so right off the bat, I do firmly believe that the Virtual Console releases for Stadium 1 and 2 will be a really good way to showcase and view these animations. Unfortunately, that is probably the end of good things I have to say about them, because overall, these are just incredibly disappointing releases to me. Because for me, Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Stadium 2, like, hearing that there's gonna be a re-release is incredibly exciting to me. The moment I heard about it, my mind was just reeling like, oh my gosh, how are these going to connect to the main series games? Are they going to like have their own way? Are they going to add a new way to get Pokemon for it, so that way like you can actually play the game to its fullest? Or are they going to be like, maybe we can just connect the Pokemon home? But no. As soon as I rewatched the trailer and looked at some images, I noticed that little blurb at the bottom that said, "Will not be able to actually connect to games," which is disappointing in a lot of ways. If you've ever played Pokemon Stadium or Pokemon Stadium 2 without having without having your own games, you might not understand this, but the rental Pokemon are kind of garbage. They do this weird thing where they decide to give the better moves to the lower stage Pokemon, while the higher stage Pokemon sometimes have good moves, and sometimes are given just hot garbage. It can vary a lot between Pokemon, but in general, a lot of the Pokemon here have some just dreadful movesets with really odd choices. Like Persian gets Slash and Bubble Beam, which is really good, but Growl and Mimic are next to useless on it. And there's just a lot of baffling choices like this. Some of the Pokemon are better than others. For example, Zapdos, in my opinion, is a really good example of a Pokemon that translates well. The main thing you want to click with Zapdos anyway is going to be Thunderbolt. And Flash and Thunder Wave is one of the best moves in RBY in general. And Flash, might not seem great, but you are playing against NPCs, so having a little bit of hacks of your own to throw against them is like a helpful thing to have. But in general, a lot of these Pokemon can just feel very disappointing, as they just have like wasted move slots. Like, why would you give Snorlax Rock Slide? Where's the ice coverage? Where's the Earthquake? This thing is walled by a Rhydon. That's one of the worst Snorlaxes I've ever seen in my life. Although, in like Poke Cup contacts, it is pretty good because since it can heal, that can just let you win a lot of matchups you otherwise wouldn't be able to. And Magic Kick is still like strong, good damage. And especially since you can heal, like the risk factor is mitigated a little bit. So like, one of the better Pokemon for Poke Cup, but like overall, a lot of the movesets are a little bit lacking, and the wasted moves can really hold you back. It's also worth noting that Pokemon in Poke Cup do not have maxed out EVs, EVs, effort values. In generations 1 and 2, you can max out every single stat with these effort values, but all the Pokemon in Pokecup and all the rentals are automatically at their lowest values. They don't have any, which means that in practice, they're pretty weak. Even if your in-game, like, playable team doesn't have, like, maxed out effort values, they're still going to have a lot of them just from naturally playing the game. And so instantly you're at a huge disadvantage if all you can use is the rental Pokemon. Combine that with the disappointing movesets, and it's just like... It is very clear that the rental Pokemon in this game were an afterthought, just that if people who maybe didn't have the games, or maybe just wanted to see some of the Pokemon they didn't catch in their own games, a way to play with them. But in terms of actually going through the games, it's definitely not the ideal situation. And that's why the releases on Virtual Console are so disappointing to me. The first thing I think of when I think of re-releasing these games is to fix these issues. But I highly doubt they will. So let's take a couple of stabs at what we could do to mitigate this problem with a re-release of these games, and also talk about why Nintendo probably didn't. Some of this are going to say reasonable, fair things about Nintendo, and I might get a little mad for some of these things. But let's go ahead and talk about them. So the first, and I think probably a lot of people's first idea for this, is going to be to inject the ROMs for the Game Boy games into the Game Boy Tower. Basically have the ROMs for the N64 games have the ROMs for the Game Boy games act as if they were in controller packs attached to the console. And that way you would be able to play through the games on the Game Boy Tower and then just use those Pokemon in the cups. Couple of problems with this though. First off, I don't know for sure how easy of a task that would be. I'm personally not super into the emulation scene on PC, so I don't really know how feasible of a thing that is. Maybe it's super duper chill and easy. Maybe it's a huge pain in the neck. Either way, Nintendo definitely could have the resources to do that sort of thing, but I don't know for sure how worth it would be overall. So I will admit freely I don't know how difficult that is, and maybe it would be a huge pain in the neck to do. But it is still a way to do it so that you can have actual Pokemon to use in Stadium 1 and 2. There is another problem, though, besides just the fact that it might be a pain in the neck, and that is that this wouldn't be a super great experience for a couple of reasons. The first is that when the original games for Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 came out, the expectation was that everyone who was getting these games would already have their own copies that they've played through or are playing through. It's a pretty big ask to ask someone to play through an entire different game just to be able to play through this one. At that point, it can kind of feel like homework, and it's a pretty big ask for someone to have to play an entire different game before they can get the full experience out of this one. And injecting the ROMs into it like that is kind of like that, but it's like a surprise bit of homework if you don't already know what's going on. And so I don't think that necessarily is the best experience overall for this game. It's also worth noting that there might be licensing issues with it. I haven't done too much research into the details of who's in charge of this Virtual Console port or not. I don't even know if that information is really available. But it's possible that this is not a Pokemon re-release, this is a Nintendo re-release, and Pokemon didn't really have much say or input into it at all. I don't know for sure. I know Pokemon still re-releases Red and Blue, or has re-released Red and Blue, so they probably have a lot more sway over that in particular. But it's very possible that this whole thing was on Nintendo, not on Pokemon. And one point of evidence that I kind of see for that is that the connectivity issues in general. I feel like if Pokemon, like the Pokemon Company International or Game Freak, had made this announcement, there would have been, right up front, a discussion about connectivity as opposed to just the blurb on the bottom about there not being any connectivity. Connectivity between the games is a huge part of the mythos of Pokemon, and taking that out is always going to be a negative to some extent, and especially after the whole Dexit thing. I feel like if this was a Pokemon Company release, then connectivity would have been talked about more. That being said, there are issues with the, injected Game Boy Tower thing. They also probably wouldn't just want to give away like 3 to 4 to 6 free games along with the N64 games. I could definitely see that being an issue that they care about. And also, gameplay-wise, I don't think it's also a perfect answer because of what we talked about before. However, there is another one that we could go with, and that is Pokemon Home connectivity. Now, Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 already have sort of a Pokemon Home-esque little feature with the Pokemon Lab or Professor Oak's lab in Stadium 2. Now, this nifty little room has some neat things. There's the machine for trading between two carts that are in the different slots. There's a machine, or there's like a little Pokedex that lets you look at the Pokemon, and it's neat. You can even listen to their cry. Like, look, it's a Rattata. Isn't he cute? But anyway, so there's a little Pokedex, but most importantly, much like Pokemon Home of today, it has its own Pokemon box organization system with its own baked-in storage. And isn't that just so neat? And also, isn't that potentially fully integratable with Pokemon Home? Now, obviously, there would have to be some decisions made with how to do this. For example, you can't actually directly access the Pokemon in your N64 boxes in Pokemon Stadium. So, like, for instance, if we go to, let's go to Free Battle, for example. At the start, you have to choose one of your game cartridges. And when you do, you get access to all of your game cartridges boxes, party, and the rental Pokemon if you need to supplement your Pokemon with those. Which is, it works. But there's no way to access the N64 boxes that are actually on the cartridge, that are actually on like the N64 cartridge. So as a result, even if you could move your Pokemon into the boxes there would have to be extra game design work done on top of that, and that's a big ask for something as simple as a Virtual Console re-release. Now, Virtual Console re-releases aren't a zero amount of work, but they're definitely done with there being not a lot of design work right up front. There's some technical work, of course, but they don't really want to redesign these games at all for most Virtual Console releases. And if we went a Pokemon Home connectivity route, then there would have to be some in that respect. Some things they could do would say, just let you access the boxes when you're making your teams. Like, for example, say you're making your team here. Instead of having a game pack up in one of those slots, you can just have one of those slots be like, Professor Oak's lab. You click in there, and then it lets you get Pokemon out of those boxes. That would be the ideal situation, I think. It would also be a really neat situation for a couple of reasons. First off, there's the fact that these games have modern Pokemon games have incredibly easy level manipulation tools. While you can't de-level Pokemon, getting Pokemon up to a specific level, which is important for something like Prime Cup and Or, well, it's really important for something like Pika Cup and Petite Cup. Sorry. Modern games like Sword and Shield have incredibly easy level manipulation tools, so like you could train Pokemon in Sword and Shield for these cups and then just transfer them over relatively easily. And that would be really cool. But then there's also some other questions in terms of how these Pokemon would be transferred and how they would be transferred back. In modern Pokemon connectivity, once they're in Pokemon Home, there are certain traits that are saved onto, like what game they came from, their original trainer, the original trainer ID, and things like their EVs and IVs, and a few other points of data that are saved on, that are like saved to that individual Pokemon. How do you save that data when transferring it to an older game like this that doesn't account for all of those points of data? Do you just let it be erased? Do you have it some way communicate with Pokemon Home so that way when this Pokemon with this trainer ID and this with this trainer ID and these set of data points get sent to it back, when that same Pokemon gets sent back, does Pokemon Home just have to remember that? Or is that something that you can build into the ROM that you're re-releasing? Maybe it's not, maybe it wouldn't be that difficult, but those are things that you have to consider. And also, how would the EVs and IVs be addressed in here? Like, would they do something like, you know, if your Pokemon has maxed out EVs already, like in the modern sense, it would just go ahead and give them maxed out EVs here? What if they've only got some EVs? Would it just give them some EVs across the board? If they had maxed out IVs, would it give them maxed out DVs here? Or would they just say, screw it, this is for Pokemon battling, so we'll just go ahead and give everything maxed out DVs and IVs? Or DVs and EVs? You know what I mean? Just give them all the maxed out stats that they can have. And that would actually be pretty interesting, because online play is a thing in these games that I haven't even touched on yet with the Virtual Console as it currently exists. It's really just like a local play pretending to be online, but it is still, or like it's just pretending to be local play, but it's online. But still, that is online play. And if they take the stance of just like giving everything max DVs, it actually changes the metagame a fair bit in Stadium 2 in particular. Because that means that the legendary electrics, and well, just about anything really, will only have one hidden power to choose from as opposed to any of them. And that changes a lot about the metagame. Could be for the better, could be for the worse. I won't say which way it would, but it would be interesting in my opinion. And so much better than just having no options at all. And, you know, it really is just like a disappointment thing to me. Because there's so many ways they could go, but it looks like we're just not going to get anything. It's also worth noting that I don't think I would actually want Pokemon Home connectivity with Virtual Console re-releases, because those are saved on a cloud. It's incredibly easy to delete the data on the Virtual Console on accident. I have accidentally deleted my saves for a couple of games on the SNES one, and it's not a fun time. And I don't think it would be ideal to move some of your actual permanent, you know, potentially emotionally connected Pokemon to these games where they could easily be lost. Now, if they had done a standalone re-release of these games, like on the eShop or something, like a Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 pack on the eShop for like, you know, heck, I'd pay $60 for that if it was good. I'd pay a lot of money for that. Like, if they did something like that, then I would definitely be more on board with it. But, you know, for Virtual Console specifically, I don't know if I would want my Pokemon to get lost in there. Like, that's something that actually scares me a little bit. And there was one... No, okay, so there were two more smaller ideas that I want to talk about that I also think are unlikely, but you could do the Pokemon Home connectivity, but rather than actually moving over your Pokemon, you instead can just copy over those Pokemon to the game. Like maybe there's a box in home called like transfer to 64. You put those Pokemon in there and it copies those Pokemon to the 64, so they're not actually moved there. You just have like a copy of those Pokemon there. That's another possibility you could do, which is the same way that Pokemon Battle Revolution handles connectivity, for instance. So it's not like a total like new idea. And last but not least, they could just go in and give all the rental Pokemon actually good movesets. I think that would also be a pretty good solution. Because if all the Pokemon that you could rent like were actually usable, that would also make a difference for how fun the game is to play it on its own. You don't get that like sense of personalization of being able to use your own Pokemon with your own unique sets. But if they at least made sure every Pokemon in the game had a good moveset, that would go a long way in towards making the game more playable. But anyway, yeah, I think that's about all I have to say about it. Obviously, these re-releases are very disappointing to me, but at the same time, I do think that for a lot of people that don't have the same crazy over-the-top options with scan lines and whatnot that I have to play the original cartridges, these re-releases will be neat enough in a way for other people to experience the very, very good animations. Just really sucks that they didn't do more with it. But anyway, that's going to be it for me today. Thank you all very much for watching today. Feel free to leave a like or comment below about what you think of these re-releases. Are you excited? How would you handle connectivity to the Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2? Do you think I'm stupid for even wishing it? Do you think that Showdown is going to make a rental-only tier for the online play of Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 on the Virtual Console? Do you think they'll do that? Because I think that'd be hysterical. That'd be so funny. Oh, I hope they do that. That'd be funny. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching. Be sure to tune into next week's discussion video, or watch the previous week's discussion videos if you haven't already. Thank you all very much for watching, and bye there, YouTube.